This is some thoughts on war. A while back I was thinking about murders, killings, and that was bad, a very unpleasant subject for sure. But now it's worse because I'm thinking about war, and that means sanctioned killing. It means murder in great numbers, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. In war, if you kill enough people, they reward you. They give you a medal. It was Stalin, I think, who said a single death is a tragedy. A million deaths is a statistic. You have to wonder, if you are thinking about war, you have to, why, after all the centuries of slaughter and bloodshed, was so little, if anything, gained, other than death and destruction, why anyone would go to war. And yet we do. People go to war when they must, when they realize that their lives will be impossible if they do not. By impossible, I mean that every moment would be torture. You would prefer death to living like that. That is why even thinking about war is painful. And that's what I was thinking, out at that extreme, when I realized that going to war was like committing suicide. People commit suicide when their lives become impossible. They prefer death to living. They end their lives because they can no longer face living. When life becomes too painful, they choose death. And going to war is like suicide. You go to war because you're no longer able to live. The difference is that in war there is someone to blame for your misery, the enemy. People go to war, they fight and die like beasts because they can no longer bear their lives. They know they may die. Probably they will die. But they go to war anyway because they must. They can no longer endure their lives. It is a terrible, unbearable position. The rock, the hard place, war. A general once wrote that war is so terrible that it is best to wage it as brutally as possible so that it might end swiftly. A book I read, the source or generator of these thoughts, was about bringing World War II to an end, the surrender of the Japanese. The war in the Pacific, a grinding oxymoron there, was especially brutal. Island after island, the Japanese dug their fortified tunnels, and they were prepared to lose, to die, but only after inflicting enormous casualties on their enemies. They chose a desperate defensive strategy, dig in and fight to the death. I said that war was like suicide. The Japanese embraced that concept, forged that bond in steel. Their pilots flew suicide missions against enemy targets, the kamikaze bombers. Their submarines launched chitin torpedoes, guided by a single man who rode it to his death. Their soldiers would fight until death was inevitable, and then they would kill themselves, by harakiri with a sword, or by pulling the pin of a grenade, or by shooting themselves with a pistol. War for them literally was suicide. Terrorists employ suicide as a weapon, and that makes them very difficult to defeat. In the Pacific War, Japan constructed a persuasive, horrifying argument that they would never surrender, that they would fight violently to the death. Defeating them would cost many lives, maybe 1 million lives would be lost in the invasion of Japan. And that way of thinking justified the use of the atomic bombs. But it was clearly a whole new level of brutality, something not done lightly. A general charged with giving the order to drop the bombs refused to do it under a verbal command. He wanted it in writing. If I'm going to kill 100,000 people, he said, I'm not going to do it on verbal orders. I want a piece of paper. He insisted, and he got it. Then Hiroshima and Nagasaki got it, and the emperor got it, and Japan surrendered. In 1947, Einstein was working in a group of atomic scientists. In that capacity, he wrote a letter to the world, which said, in part, "In the shadow of the atomic bomb, it has become apparent that all men are brothers. If we recognize this truth and act upon this recognition, mankind may go forward to a higher plane of human development. If the angry passions of a nationalistic world engulf us further, we are doomed." Cain and Abel were brothers. Even brothers go to war. And war really is suicide. And if we do go to war again, we are doomed. We will be killing ourselves. We can forget about that higher plane of human development. I'll put my money on war. It's in our blood.